Good morning, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode number 18 in Be With Me. We're in the book of Hebrews, and I'm going to title today, The Most Important Conversation in History. And before I get to that, I'm going to tell you a story that illustrates the conversation. So earlier this summer, I watched a young relative suffer in the hospital. So he had appendicitis, and he didn't do anything to cause it. It was, what causes appendicitis? As far as doctors know, it's just the fall. He was totally blameless. And quite frankly, it was just horrible to watch this child suffer. It was just horrible. That's the word for it. It was horrible for me and all the other relatives to watch this. In a sense, it's the closest I can think of to a story of unjust suffering. And in a sense, I tasted what we're going to talk about today, which was the father watching a son suffer and the most unjust suffering. Now, the difference is that I was not able to save him from that, my grandson. I was not able to save him from that suffering. But boy, if I could have saved him from it, I certainly was able. I would have done it. If I was able, I would have done it. Okay, so now let's take our hospital story there, unjust suffering, and let's put it into a conversation between the father and the son. So would you choose your son or someone in your family to suffer, someone in your Godhead intimacy trinity? Would you trade their life, their suffering for a bunch of knuckleheads? That's one of the amazing things about the story. So, I don't understand the Trinity perfectly, and of course, neither do you. But we know it's this 3-in-1. We have Father, Son, and Spirit. And would you choose a son for substitution for knuckleheads? Most people would say no. The Godhead says yes. And in a sense, if you think about the Trinity, if you just think about it like a big lump of clay, and I know we divide up the clay, in thirds or something like that, but the point is, it's a part of himself. The Father and the Son are one. And would you choose a part of yourself as a substitution for knuckleheads? So in a sense, I think that God, in a Trinitarian unity sense, in a sense, offered himself on the cross. I'm not trying to apostatize, but suffered the pain, or worse, watched the suffering of the pain of his child, of his Jesus, of a part of his family. So in the Trinity, these names, Father, Son, and Spirit, are used to help communicate these profound relationships. And probably the words don't go deep enough. Let's go with family. And the thing about this is the Father has the ability. So our official verse today is from Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death. And Jesus was heard because of his reverence. But then here's the part that the verse doesn't say. The Father says no. So the prayer that we're talking about, I think, is from Matthew 26:39, where it's, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me, the suffering and death that's ahead. This is in the Garden of Gethsemane. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And so the Father listens to this. The Son is absolutely 100% heard. And then the Father has to make this decision in this conversation. Am I going to grant your request, or I'm going to allow the suffering of my Son? And remember, this is for knuckleheads. So the Father was able to. This verse says the Father was able to save him from death. The Father was able and chose not to save him. He chose more suffering. He's already suffered some in the Garden of Gethsemane, but the worst was yet to come. So why? You have to go to the John 3:16. For God so loved the world, knuckleheads, that he gave. So he had the ability to save, and yet he gave. The Father chose me and chose you, in a sense, quote unquote, over Jesus. He chose not to save his Son from suffering and death, not to save himself from suffering and death, to give us salvation. So this is substitutionary salvation. So he substituted a son, a perfect son, in the most unjust suffering in the history of the world, took a third of the Trinity and allowed suffering and death to allow knuckleheads to be free from suffering and death. So this conversation, quote unquote, between the Father and the Son, where the Father essentially says no to the Son, and the Father says yes to his suffering, yes to his Son's suffering, gives a part of himself, gives a part of his family to save the world. So, remember, of all the unjust suffering in human history, this was the most unjust. The Father giving his Son and having the ability to save him and willing to do this. So this most important conversation in history affects us. We get salvation. The knuckleheads get salvation because the Father, who was able to save Jesus, decides not to save Jesus and allows him to go through the suffering as a substitutionary sacrifice. So I was thinking about the response. I always like to finish the podcast. And, I was thinking just the word thanks. Thanks be to God and thanks be to the Son and the Spirit. It just does not seem enough. Like, hey, a little tip of the hat and thank you to God for this, ability to save him and choosing not to, so that he chooses us. The thanks does not seem enough. You have to go into the worship category. You have to go into the wow category, the awe category, where we are silenced and we put our hands over our mouth, or maybe bow. We have to bow for this conversation. Thanks for listening.